Morally Conflicted Dark Knight is probably the only one out of these that I believe, because for me, the guy, Gus or Guy, however you want to pronounce the name, he used axes the whole time. I don't know if the leveling system for Final Fantasy II changed at all. Final Fantasy II and Final Fantasy III weren't actually released in North America. Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI were actually released as Final Fantasies II and III in North America. It was super strange. I actually just realized they completely skipped over Final Fantasy V as well. Final Fantasy II had a super scuffed leveling system. Final Fantasy III, the plot line of the Final Fantasy III that came out on the NES and the Final Fantasy III that we saw in North America are actually the stories at its core is like the same. You still deal with like Cloud of Darkness and stuff. As far as I know, like the plot changed a little bit. Like I remember playing Final Fantasy III on the iPod. An iPod Touch. Wow. Your characters are actually like named and stuff, and I don't know, it's just different. I never finished it on the NES because it's like really difficult, or Famicom, I guess. But okay, so now I guess we're gonna go to Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy II is a game that I love, and I hate that I love it so much because it's fun. The story is really cool. The story is really sad. It has a much more somber, unhappy tone to it the whole time. The whole game is just like it's rough. But the story was really good. It was just everything else about the game sucked. It's my hot take. Dude.
The growing popularity of the first Final Fantasy helped the originally unscheduled second installment arrive on Japanese store shelves 364 days later.
Nice. How's the volume?
Final Fantasy I was never intended to be a smash hit, its story didn't lend itself to a sequel. Because of this, Square felt the freedom to take numerous aspects of the first game in a completely new direction. Final Fantasy II was released in Japan on December 17, 1988. Sakaguchi, Amano, and Uematsu were back on board for the sequel, as well as several members from the original development team. The story began with 4 youngsters fleeing the forces of the Emperor of Palamecia, who had attacked their hometown of Fynn and killed their parents. While there was no prophecy that said they were destined to destroy evil and save their world, the heroes eventually became a humble warrior, a cautious mage, a simple-minded monk, and a morally conflicted Dark Knight. But unlike Final...
Hold on, run that back.
They were destined to destroy evil and save their world, the heroes eventually became a humble warrior, a cautious mage, a simple-minded monk, and a morally conflicted Dark Knight.
That's a lot different than when I played the game, man. So their names are, I can just say them. This guy is Firion. Firion, I believe is the name, or Firion, I don't know how you want to pronounce it.
Warrior, a cautious
His
mage.
sister Maria. No. Adoptive sister Maria.
A simple-minded monk.
A wild, well, simple-minded, like they said. His name was Guy, or Gus, depending on the translation.
And a morally conflicted.
And Leon, who was Maria's brother. Morally Conflicted Dark Knight is probably the only one out of these that I believe, because for me, the guy, Gus or Guy, however you want to pronounce the name, he used axes the whole time.
He became a humble warrior, a cautious mage, a simple-minded monk, and a morally conflicted Dark Knight. But unlike Final Fantasy I, there was no opportunity to upgrade these classes. For the first time, they were ingrained into their characters. They also didn't level up like their predecessors. Instead,
yeah, okay, hold on. I'm not certain that... So that's changed, or am I remembering it wrong? I feel like in the newer version, they leveled up and leveled up their skills, but in the original, they might have just leveled up skills. I don't know. We'll see.
Characters. They also didn't level up like their predecessors. Instead, the individual attributes of each character leveled up, including hit points, magic power, stamina, strength, spirit, agility, intelligence, and evasion. These categories would grow stronger the more they were used or needed, and the same was true for weapons and spells.
There's what scuff.
Focusing on a character's melee or magical abilities would cause the opposite to be adversely affected, forcing players to choose one or the other. This new system was designed to create a more realistic progression formula based on cause and effect.
Wait.
And give this new to be adversely affected. Focus grow stronger the more they were used or needed, and the same was true for weapons and spells. Focusing on a character's melee or magical abilities would cause the opposite to be adversely affected, forcing players to choose one or the other.
Interesting. So that is actually different than it is in the Game Boy Advance port, which is the one that I played. I don't remember that happening, but I do remember there being a problem in this where, like, you just attack your party members over and over again, and you just, like, max out your skills right away.
Final Fantasy II also fashioned a new style of questing and story progression, which involved memorizing key terms from NPC dialogues that would be brought up in later conversations. It was a process that involved lots of unpredictable inspection and time-consuming bouts of trial and error going through the conversation trees.
So, fun fact, I don't think they used this system after Final Fantasy II. It was actually something they kind of grabbed from Dragon Quest. That was something in Dragon Quest that you would kind of do, is like, if you wanted to interact with everything, it was all done through a menu where you would, if you wanted to talk to somebody, you would have to walk up and press A, or start, or whatever. And it wouldn't just talk to them, you had to select talk. If you wanted to climb upstairs, you'd have to go near the stairs and then go to your menu and press stairs. Something like that. Wacky. Can you get off the keyboard?
If they were lucky enough, players could stumble upon... Final Fantasy II almost made its way to the States in 1990 under the subtitle Dark Shadow over Palakia, but it was cancelled due to development time and the release of the Super Nintendo. US audiences would have to wait until 2003 to play Final Fantasy II when it was reinvented, along with its predecessor, for consoles, handhelds, and mobile phones around the world.
Yep.
Final Fantasy II was the first sequel in the industry not to feature any characters or locations from the game that preceded it. It turned the unexpected RPG series into a bona fide franchise, and left Japanese gamers waiting for 16 months to play the next sequel.